Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us here on our YouTube channel. Well, today we are going to get some great information on marketing and starting your farm business, as well as using value-added products and discovering niches, as well as your target audience. A lot of great information. I'm going to be speaking with Sarah Cornelisse, who is coming to us from the Penn State Extension Service there at Penn State University in Pennsylvania. Ton of great content, ton of great information. We're going to get it started for you right now. Sarah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Glad to be here.
Well, good. I was thrilled to find you. I think I located you on Twitter. Are you on Twitter?
I am on Twitter.
Okay.
Yes.
That is such a great resource for me to find people to come on this show as I scroll through and I look at people who are doing things and having things in common with me and with this show. And then I came across your name, and then I went over to the Penn State Extension website and then to your page, and oh my goodness, your page is a wealth of information. There are a lot of great articles, and you've written a lot of great stuff on there.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. I was thrilled to see all that. There's so much I haven't been able to read all of it yet, but I know I will be.
There's a lot of great information on the whole Penn State Extension website.
Yeah, what a great resource. Well, let's do this. I would love to introduce you to our audience, but I would love to have you do it. Like if you could just give us a little bit of background on yourself, tell us what it is you do for Penn State and kind of your upbringing and all of that, and then we'll jump into the nuts and bolts.
Okay, sure. So, my name is Sarah Cornelisse, and I'm a senior extension associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Sociology, and Education at Penn State. I work from the main campus and work with the county-based educators on topics and issues in the area of ag entrepreneurship. Primarily under that, direct marketing and value-added dairy entrepreneurship are some of my specialty areas.
Okay.
I'm originally from Western New York, too, so came down to Pennsylvania and Penn State to do my graduate education and have stayed here since then.
All right. Now, did you grow up in and around agriculture?
I grew up around it, so lived on a small farm, more of a hobby farm, as some people like to call it. Mm-hmm. But I had a number of friends who their families were dairy farmers, and that's how I got into dairy and agriculture. 4-H certainly showed dairy cows and other, a lot of other 4-H exhibits.
All right, so dairy all around you, and that Western New York has got quite a bit of dairy, right?
We do, yes.
Okay.
So Western New York, that Livingston, Wyoming County area. Those aren't the counties I'm from, but they're very, very nearby, and they're very high in I think, ranked top in New York State for dairy industry.
Okay. And 4-H, and then on through high school, did you continue showing animals during high school?
I did show animals up through high school in the time I graduated and aged out of the 4-H program.
Got it. Okay. So did that, and then at some point you decided to study agriculture. How did you make that decision?
So that was actually pretty interesting. I went to my undergraduate and to actually study to become a math teacher. Mm-hmm. Didn't study agriculture. It was a liberal arts school in the SUNY system in New York. But in the summers, I would work for dairy farms. So I still had my summer job working on farms. And by the time I graduated undergrad, I kind of made a decision that high school math wasn't what I wanted to pursue. Mm-hmm. And started looking at graduate programs and what could I meld my math degree in, as well as agriculture. And that's how I came upon agricultural economics. Seemed like a perfect fit.
Sure.
And so came down to Penn State to do my master's degree.
Okay. And then how does that lead you into extension work?
It was very serendipitous. It was when I was completing my degree here, I was working with some faculty that were had extension appointments, and the position that I have now was open at the time. And so they encouraged me to apply for that, as I was considering, what I would do once I graduated with my master's. So I applied for the position. Fortunately, got the position, and have been here ever since. It's just, it's just been a perfect fit for, because I always still retain that desire for teaching and education. And then of course the agricultural part, which I had personally enjoyed, and to find a career where I was able to do both was just wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. So explain to us what an extension educator does at the university campus at that level versus the extension educators that we're all familiar with out in our county areas.
So I would say there's no one set description for what myself as an extension associate does versus some of the other extension associates on the Penn State campus in other academic departments. The approach that I've worked under while I've been here at Penn State is, as a developer of materials and resources, I try to keep an eye on the trends in agriculture, in the area of business management and ag entrepreneurship, and address those with content and material that will be useful to farmers and producers, as well as the educators out in the counties who are working more directly with those producers.
Okay.
And so, I do take calls. If, somebody calls me or emails me, I will work with them directly. I may hand them off to an educator that is in their area to have more of a one-on-one relationship if that's needed. And I also go out and speak at conferences and workshops and am involved in educational programming in that way as well.
Okay. So times have changed in farming. And,
Yes.
as I think about this, as I think about the history of agriculture, we have completely flip-flopped to where at one point in time, almost everybody in the world was involved in agriculture. Now you look at the United States, almost nobody is percentage-wise. And so things have completely flipped on their head. And as I think about farming and I think about agriculture and you think about the history of the world, it seems almost like farming kind of filtered down, where at one point almost everybody was doing it, and so they passed it to the next generation, and the people who wanted to farm, they were able to take over and carry on those farms, and it kind of filtered down, and we got fewer and fewer farmers, fewer and fewer, until we reached the point we're at today. And now there's this question of, well, what if somebody wants to go and start a farm? Which, if you go back 200 or 300 years, that's probably not even a question. But now, today, it's this question, and it's very, very difficult. And so I'm totally going to put you on the spot, and when I'm going to ask you, in today's world, if somebody comes to you and they say, wow, I've read your articles, you've got all this knowledge, and you've talked about all these different niches and these ways to do value adding and things like that, how do I get started farming? How do I go out and buy a piece of land or lease a piece of ground and make it work? What would you tell them?
Sure. So certainly the hurdles and the challenges are much greater now than in the past. And so I think the way to overcome that is really to spend time doing research and planning and really understand what you're getting into. What are the different considerations that you need to take into account, not only for the specific type of production or agriculture, the business that you want to start, but also for yourself personally, because your personal situation is going to be different than that of the neighbor, whether they're already in agriculture or whether it's another person that's looking to get started. And so the more planning and the more research you can do, the more questions you can get answered before you make any capital investment, I think the better off you're going to be. And so, and that may be because that may be my answer because I'm in sort of the business side of things.
Right.
Is my but planning, I think, is the best preparation, and also prepares you to be able to make quick changes, particularly smaller farmers that may have to adapt more quickly to changing trends than large farms.
So when we say, so I like that you brought up quick changes, because when we say planning, do you mean coming up with like what your business model is going to look like, if you're going to be doing direct sales, if you're going to be value adding, if you're going to be selling commodities, figuring all that up front, not just buying a piece of land and saying I'll figure out what works, but knowing kind of the direction you want to go before you make this investment?
Yes, absolutely. Certainly we have people contact Extension and ask that question, hey, I've just inherited or I've just purchased this land, what should I do?
Mm-hmm.
And so we do run into those situations, but
Right.
Again, I would advise before you do that, do the whole plan. Think about what it is that you're going to produce.
Mm-hmm.
Think about what your knowledge area or level is for that, how you're going to market it, run projections on the finances. Think about how you're going to finance capital purchases.
Mm-hmm.
Where the labor is going to come from, all those different areas, and do that before you start making those investments. Because unfortunately, I've seen examples where people have made investments and then are trying to make it work after the fact, and their hurdles are a bit higher because they've already made that investment.
Well, and it makes a lot of sense what you're saying as well. If your business model is going to be, say, we'll take dairy, and we'll talk about that here coming up in a minute, but you're going to do value adding, maybe you want to sell ice cream or something like that, then location makes a big difference, obviously. And you want to be around where people can come buy your stuff. And so you don't want to buy the land first. If that's your business model, then you got to kind of tailor where you get the land or where you lease the land to making that work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great example that you brought up, because there may be zoning issues that you need to be aware of and think about how the local area is going to view the specific business that you want to create and start. If you're thinking about having a direct marketing business that requires people to come to you at the location, that's going to mean an increase in traffic. And how will your neighbors react? What's the zoning? Any other regulations and permits? You should really need to know that before you make that investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one of the things that I hear, one of the things people ask me about the most often are the obstacles to getting in. And when we're talking obstacles, on a small farm basis, the biggest obstacle seems to be land. On a medium-sized or a larger farm basis where people are going to be involved with commodities, it's land, but it's also equipment. What do you tell people about overcoming those obstacles, the price of land and the price of equipment?
So I think it really comes back to planning and running through the math. Running through, if you're going to purchase equipment, thinking what's that time frame look like? How long are you going to keep that equipment? How are you going to maintain it, repair it, cash flow? And the more of that planning you can do ahead of time, and the projections, same with the purchase of land. And there are a lot of programs that exist. I know, for instance, we have FarmLink in Pennsylvania that can assist with purchase of land. And I'm sure there's programs and organizations in other states that have similar programs that can assist with land purchase. But also thinking about alternatives. So maybe you don't need to purchase the land to start out with. Maybe you start with a rental and go from there to allow you to build equity in other areas of the business other than the land. Machinery is a slightly different matter, but certainly thinking about depending on the type of agriculture you're going into, are there things that you can custom hire so that you don't have to make that investment in machinery up front before you're prepared? And so being open to options and alternatives, I think, don't think there's just one set way that you have to do something. Find the way that works best for you.
Okay. Now, I guess one of your expertise is listed as farmstead and small scale value added dairy entrepreneurship. So that's a mouthful. Define that for us. What does that mean?
So farmstead and small scale value added dairy entrepreneurship is, I define that as a dairy who is looking to diversify their income stream and is looking to do that through processing of dairy products.
Okay.
Might be cheese, ice cream, maybe just bottling their own milk, fluid milk. And Farmstead has a definition where the product is coming from the dairy itself, and it's all located at the same location. Small scale is a slightly different definition in that it could be a dairy farmer who starts a small processing enterprise, but perhaps purchases milk from a neighbor, or maybe they're processing a product and they have decided to end their own dairy farm, so they're no longer milking the cows, but instead purchasing from other producers.
Okay. And so when you talk about direct marketing, and we'll stick with dairy here for a moment because that's kind of where your niche is, and this can be a great example for other industries as well, or other aspects of agriculture. But what kinds of direct marketing do you suggest when it comes to dairy operations? What are you seeing people have success with?
Sure. And so I'll edit just one word on there. So I don't like to say that I suggest anything.
Okay.
I like to say that I'm going to discuss options and expose producers and business owners to the different possibilities that exist.
Okay.
Because what works for one person may not work for another,
Sure.
So that's why the kind of change of the word there. But there's a lot of different options for direct marketing. So I see dairy value-added dairy producers start with farmers markets, and that seems to be a pretty common one. It's a great entry to direct marketing, and having the interaction with the customer allows them to get feedback from the customer, as well as typically produce a product on lower quantities, so a smaller quantity. And as well as perfect their processing. But then, there's a lot of other options as well, having an on-farm market, so a store location that people can come to there on the farm. Internet sales, so having a website and an online shopping cart is another option. And there's certainly a lot of different advantages and disadvantages to each of these options to consider. But then, so those are kind of, I think, the primary direct marketing option. And then we have producers that will then move into maybe a CSA, being involved with a CSA. So another farmer that's doing a fruit and vegetable, typically, CSA wants to include some other products, and they could, a dairy value-added dairy farmer could cooperate with that producer and have a kind of a dairy share to that. Selling direct to restaurants, and then also to small stores, independent grocery stores, markets, as well as the larger chain grocery stores. So that certainly gets a little bit more into wholesaling. But I think that's kind of the stepwise experience that I've seen our processors go through.
Okay, and so these are all alternatives for people. They give them an alternative to just putting their milk in the milk truck and shipping it off to the creamery and getting these commodity prices.
Yes, yeah. So if they want to direct market, those are the different options available to them.
Okay, now in terms of direct marketing, what options do people have in terms of products? And are you seeing one product or one line of products or something like that in the dairy industry that seems to be having more success than others?
certainly success is defined individually by the different producers, but we see a lot of here in Pennsylvania. We have raw milk sales are allowed, so we do see dairy farmers go down the route of direct sales of raw milk, and that often is an entryway into direct marketing because they don't have to do any additional processing that requires capital investment. So it allows them to test the market out some. But then I think cheese is another very popular product that we see typically after, other than fluid milk, direct marketing and fluid milk, cheese production. And certainly because there's a lot of, advantages when it comes to storing and shelf stability that come with cheese. But we also have producers who are doing ice cream and yogurts and puddings and those other dairy products too. But then you get into some processing considerations that they have to work through.
Okay. Yeah, interesting stuff. Now, as we're talking about this, we should probably frame this as well because, just like growing wheat or just like growing corn, dairy spans from very small producers to just huge producers. Out here where I live in Idaho and where I'm from in California, there are some gargantuan dairies. They're just enormous. And so when you're looking at your region or Western New York where you grew up, what's the average size of a dairy there? Do you happen to know that number off the top of your head? Or a ballpark anyway?
Ballpark number, I believe now is averaging 60 to 80, somewhere in that realm. So it's fairly small, but Pennsylvania, and I'll say that's the kind of average for Pennsylvania. I'm not sure what Western New York is these days, but Pennsylvania has a significant number of Amish and Mennonite dairy farmers, which they tend to have smaller herd sizes. Got it.
Okay. And so when we're talking about some of these ideas, we're talking about niches that people who are trying to get into farming or they're trying to sustain their business operations, look for new ways to generate income and things like that to sustain kind of the climate we've been in the dairy industry. Were tips and suggestions that might help them weather the storm or get off to a good start and create a sustainable business.
Yes.
Okay. Now, with the way things have been going in the dairy industry for the last couple of years, are you seeing more people who maybe were traditionally just in the commodity-based model moving their existing business into direct sales and direct marketing and things like that?
We certainly have seen a lot of interest in doing this. Numbers, attendance at educational events that we've held are very high. We've had a webinar last fall as well as some conference sessions, and attendance has been wonderful. Certainly, I don't imagine that most of those individuals will all go out and even this year start a value-added dairy enterprise, but the fact that there's so many people interested in hearing more about it, I think is a sign of the times.
And is there, you hear about all these people that are moving in this direction, people that are getting started in their direct marketing products, they're doing value-added products. Is there a saturation point out there? And if so, are we anywhere close to that?
Certainly, theoretically, a saturation point would exist. I don't think we're at that point yet across the board. There may be in certain localized areas, maybe reaching that saturation point, but I couldn't say where that area is. So that is one thing that a producer's thinking about this, needs to be aware of and needs to consider is what's going on around him or her in their local or regional area, and what the other competition is, what the market looks like.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned farmers markets earlier, and obviously farmers markets have been growing in popularity for quite a while now, and so almost anywhere you go, especially if you're on vacation or something like that, you'll find a farmer's market because it's such a draw. and they're so popular. So it makes me wonder then, with them now have being popular and being around for a while, are they full? Like, if somebody's coming in now and saying, I want to be part of the farmers market, are we seeing farmers being turned away and saying, well, I'm sorry, we're full?
I can say that in the past few years, from what I've read and heard from colleagues who work more directly with farmers markets, there's actually been a slight decrease in farmers market attendance. And so there's, we may have already peaked a little bit with farmers markets. I do know that typically the managers of farmers markets like to ensure a good variety of vendors. And so they will try to, make sure that they have a good diversity in terms of who's there on the producer side, the vendor side, and not have too much overlap. So if a market already has a couple value-added dairy producers, the likelihood of a new producer joining that market is going to be lower than if the market maybe only has one or doesn't have any.
Yeah, that's interesting that you talked about there might be, we may have hit the peak in farmers market. So I was going to ask you about what consumer trends that you've been observing next. So it sounds like that is possibly one of them. What are some of the other things you're seeing?
Are we thinking about specifically to dairy or?
Well, I think we're kind of focusing on dairy just because you have a level of expertise there, and we can use this as something where we can extrapolate out to other areas in agriculture. But certainly if you've got knowledge on consumer trends outside of dairy, then we'd be happy to hear those too.
Okay. Well, I thought about this question in relation to dairy. So, with products, dairy products at the national level, the trends continue to be increasing consumption of cheese. Yogurt has actually seemed to have peaked, spoonable yogurt, that is. For the past 4 years, yogurt consumption has actually decreased some, but still it's much higher than, say, even 10 years ago. I think there's growing interest in dairy products from sheep and goats.
Okay.
And so that could be a niche area that depending on where somebody is located and their access to different diverse populations, they may want to consider whether, sheep and goats dairy products is something to pursue. Local. So a lot of people will ask, about local versus organic versus GMO-free, and a lot of these different different marketing things. Local seems to be number one priority, and the research has shown that as well. So the willingness to pay for a product that is local to the consumer, they're more willing to pay for a locally produced product than, say, an organic product if that organic product is not local.
Okay.
And so, all things equal, the local product will win out with the consumer.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So local seems to be the big, which, by the way, is a huge advantage to somebody because there's only so many people that can be local in a given market.
That's true. There is always the question of what defines local.
Right.
So that's going to be different from one geographic area to the next. So something to also be aware of.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you about marketing. You've written a lot of neat stuff about marketing, but one thing that really stood out to me, I don't think we've ever discussed it on this show in, oh my goodness, we're up almost 800 episodes now. And that is things that you can do, especially on social media when you're trying to market your product, your farm, your services, whatever that may be, that can actually be considered illegal. And you had written a little bit about that. Can you talk about that a bit?
I will do my best. So I actually co-wrote an article with Nicole Cook down at University of Maryland about the importance of keeping your social media activity legal from a business perspective. So I think what falls typically into the category that would be concerning regarding the legality is using other individuals and other businesses' content and presenting it as your own. So whether it's a photo or a video, music would fall into this category as well. So if you just hop onto Google, let's say, and say, that's a great picture, I want to use it, a great image, and then you just download a copy, because it's very easy to do. You just download a copy of whatever that image is and then upload it, say, onto Facebook and onto your business page. If it's not original work, or if you don't own the copyright to that imagery or that piece of art, then you're actually breaking the law. And so you want to make sure that you've either acquired the copyright or you're creating your own works of art, whether it's photo, video, music.
That's really interesting because, of course, take a place like Facebook, people will put up photographs and artwork and whatever that may be because they want it to be shared. So the line is where? So if you have a business page on Facebook and you share somebody else's post of a beautiful picture of a pasture or some dairy cattle or something like that, if they're receiving credit for it because you shared their actual post, is that not crossing the line? But if you were to copy and paste that picture onto your page and put it out there as artwork for your page, is that now on the other side? I mean, and I know it's probably a moving line, but
yeah, there is certainly probably a gray area, and I want to just make it clear that I'm not I'm not a lawyer,
not a legal expert. Okay,
so so please consult anybody that's listening. Please consult. But I think what you described is a fairly accurate representation. If you're giving credit to the individual or the other person whose material it was, whose content it was, when you share it, then you're in a much safer position than if you do not provide that attribution. And so, certainly providing the attribution should be the minimum that you do if you're sharing. Gaining that other person's permission to share is even better. So if you can find contact information for somebody whose content that you want to share on your business page and ask them, hey, you had this great picture I saw on your Instagram page, I'd love to share it on my Facebook page. Phone call, email is better than a phone call just because you have something in writing.
Okay.
And then keep track of that.
Got it. Okay. Now, so photographs and other people's content, that's one way. Are there other ways that you see people that maybe possibly getting themselves in trouble or at least putting themselves at risk?
I would say most businesses, the other content is the priority. The social media platforms do change their terms and policies and update those on a regular basis. So users should keep up to date on what each of the platforms' policies are. I know that in the past there have been changes in what one could do regarding contests and those sorts of things that, promotional activities that businesses would use to increase follower numbers and engagement. And so you want to make sure that you're not crossing any lines that any of the social media platforms might have spelled out in their terms and policies. The other thing to be aware of for businesses who have online marketing is the privacy laws that have been enacted primarily in the European Union, but also in California, in allowing people to know that you're collecting information about them, making them aware of how you'll use their information, allowing them to opt out. And so if somebody were redirecting from a Facebook page to say a SurveyMonkey form or a Google form that collected information to be put onto an email list, that would be an area of concern where the business needs to ensure that they're following those privacy laws.
Okay. Okay, very good. Now, as I was going through the article, you brought up some strategies for mitigating some of these issues, and one of the things I read about was hiring somebody to actually come out and take pictures at your own property and in your own activities. And so, tell us about that strategy.
Well, so the strategy of hiring somebody to create this content for you is that then on your, if you have the proper arrangement, then you own the copyright to that material, and then you can use it in any of your marketing, whether it's online or offline, and you can edit the content, because that's another area that typically, if you're taking imagery that another person owns copyright to, you shouldn't be editing it, so like cropping it out or altering a picture in any way. But if you own that copyright and that's your content, then you can do that. So if you just need part of a picture for one marketing campaign and you need the whole image for a different marketing campaign, you have that flexibility to alter and use that content as needed.
Okay. Now, when it comes to doing that, so when I think about the strategy, I love the idea of somebody doing that and us having great images collected from our farm. But then I start thinking about the cost and the expense of hiring somebody to do that. I think about, maybe I just hire them for one day and they take a lot of pictures, but then of course that's me in the same clothes and the same weather, the same seasonality in every single photograph. So is this something where you suggest, as people are coming up with their enterprise budgets or something like that, they actually work this into their marketing plan and their marketing budget?
Absolutely. So if you're going to hire out any of these activities, these services, such as photography for marketing, then it should be in a budget. And actually, even the time that you spend on keeping your social media presence up to date should be included in a budget, probably under labor, because it's use of your time. So yeah, I would advise that.
Yeah. Okay. So, and the reason I'm asking this is because it's obviously very tempting to see a great picture out there on Google and just use it. Versus paying a photographer who's a professional and they're going to charge you a good rate to come out and collect this of yourself. Now, let me ask you about this, because there are sites you can go to. I use one called iStock Photo that you can go to, and you can pay for these professionally done photographs. And so you can type in a search term and you can try and get the photograph you're looking for that will emphasize and draw people into your content. To me, that seems like a middle ground. I don't think it's as good as the photographs being of your own place, of your own livestock, of your own crops, or of yourself and your family. But it seems like a middle ground to that, to save that expense. What are your thoughts there?
I agree with you. That's actually a very good middle ground, one that we do here with Extension ourselves. And but you're right. There's it's not that personalized feel. Taken from a farm, you don't know where, but you are managing the risk there associated with just downloading something from Google or another search engine. I think, but I do want to say at the same time, anybody that's got a smartphone, or even just a regular camera, taking your own pictures, there's an authenticity and a transparency that comes with, your own imagery. So if you can, and that's what a lot of consumers are looking for, particularly with their smaller farms, is that connection, that authenticity, that transparency, and creating your own content. It may not be as slick and as polished as a professional image, but depending on who your audience is, that's probably in most cases just fine. So, and that goes to knowing who your audience is, knowing who your market is. I know businesses that do hire the professional to take photos that they use on social media. But that's because they know what their target consumers are looking for and what they expect. Other businesses may not have that same consumer market, and so doing it yourself is perfectly acceptable.
Well, just a couple thoughts on that. One, just an anecdote. I use that iStock photo, and every now and then I will type in, like, I don't know, I'll just think of a phrase. I'll type in like happy farmer, because a picture of a happy farmer would fit on whatever I'm writing about or whatever I want to post. And I get some picture of some guy like in Denmark in lederhosen with a wooden pitchfork. And I'm like, all right, this is not my audience. I am not putting this up. So you don't always get exactly what you're looking for sure.
That's true.
But another thing. Go ahead.
I was just going to add in also with those sites is also you still have to be aware of what the permissions are on using that content.
Okay.
So if it's there's different, I'll just leave it at that. There's different permissions, and so even though you're purchasing the content and the copyright permission to use it, you still need to be aware of specifics. So and you can find those on the different sites.
Yeah. And just another thought on that is I read that article and I was reading about that idea. I just had this flash in my head. Now, this is going to, again, be middle ground. This is not going to be professional photography, but we've got a decent camera here. I bought it for my business, and so it's an SLR camera. It does a great job, and then you can do a lot of editing of the photographs afterwards. And I'm sitting here. I've got a 13-year-old daughter here on the farm, and I'm sitting here going, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a version of what you're talking about. I'm going to start paying her. I don't know what I'm going to pay her. 50 cents a picture that I buy or $1 a picture. I don't know. And have her be the one going out and just taking a lot of pictures and hoping that in the shotgun approach, a few of them hit and they're really good photos that we'd like to use. And so it kind of gave me an inspiration there. Like you want to get them working and give them some inspiration. This is one way I'm going to try with my daughter. Yep. So, and we'll see if she'll become an entrepreneur or not. I don't know, but we will see.
That's a great idea.
Well, you brought up target market a second ago, and I know we're getting close to the end here, but I'd love to have you talk a little bit more to that, how people can figure out and identify who is actually their target market.
Okay. Sure. So when we say target market, we're referring to who is the business's first and best customer. So who is the person that is really looking for your product and is going to become a repeat purchaser. Okay. Because that is the group of individuals that is going to be your primary target market. And we also like to, have a primary target market and then maybe a secondary or tertiary market, and these different groups of people you're going to be able to differentiate. There's going to be a differentiating factor between the different groups. Maybe it's on a demographic factor. Maybe it's on a geographic. Well, geographic would be demographic, but maybe it's in how you communicate with them. There's going to be a differentiating factor between those different groups, but the primary target market is really what a lot of marketing plans and activities are built around.
Okay. Now, how do you figure out who these people are? And you wrote in there about understanding how they're thinking, what they're thinking. How do you figure out what they're thinking?
There's a lot of different ways to do this. All of it's through research. A lot of it is, a lot of entrepreneurs have a gut feeling, but that's based on interactions that they're having. Sure. So they may not be aware that they've been assessing as they've kind of interacted with people or talked with different individuals. But that's it's kind of a form of research that they've been doing and maybe not in a formal manner. Mm-hmm. So, just going out and talking in your local community and, saying, hey, what do you think about my product? Or I'm going to do this. Would you be interested? Is one great way of assessing that and figuring out what people think and maybe what their price points are or what needs that they have that your product or business might fit. There's certainly more formal research methods in terms of looking at census information to kind of get an idea of specific numbers within a geographic area of number of families that have children or number of individuals at certain income levels, those sorts of things. But I think for somebody who's kind of trying to figure out their target market, a mix of both the formal and more informal research is probably the best bet.
Okay. Yeah, that research piece is so big. Like I think back to when I started this podcast, and I had an idea in my head of who I was making this show for, and I would be able to tell you 4 or 5, maybe 6 or 7 characteristics of the person that I thought would listen to this show. But honestly, I had no idea if that person actually existed. And I think that's where the research comes in, is you've imagined this person in your head, but now does that person really exist, or is it just you?
Right. Well, and even being able to have those 5 or 6 characteristics, I think is a big step, because a lot of people will say, well, my product's great. Everybody's going to want to buy this product.
Right.
It's not necessarily true.
No.
So, just being able to list out those characteristics is a fantastic first step that everybody should do.
Right. Yeah, you think your product is great. Your friends and family, they tell you your product is great, but until somebody is willing to give up their money for your product, you really don't know.
Right.
Okay. Well, Sarah, this has been great. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate, by the way, all the content you've got out there. It is there's a ton of great content, and I encourage everybody to go over there and take full advantage of the fact that you've put that out there. If people would like to ask you questions I haven't brought up, or they'd like to see your content, where should they go to be able to do that?
So they can find my content as well as everything else that Penn State Extension publishes on our website, and that's extension.psu.edu. If somebody would like to contact me individually, my email is sar243@psu.edu, and I can be found on Twitter at @scornelisse.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Really, really appreciate your time, and had a great time getting to know you and learn a lot here on the show today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, everybody. Thank you to Sarah Cornelisse for coming on and sharing all of that great information. And as always, enjoy your journey to the ultimate lifestyle business, agriculture.